Okay, we're live there again. And I may have had the thing private for the last live stream. Maybe not. Maybe nobody genuinely showed up, and if they didn't show up, that's fine. I go and do something else. But if there's any questions, I'll take them. If you can hear me, and if you're out there, please feel free to pop a comment there in the live chat box, and at least it'll indicate to me that that you can hear me and see me and so on. I don't know why I must have pressed the wrong freaking button there. Kevin Dunn, how are you? I'm after starting the live stream there 10 minutes ago or whatever. You can hear me, Ministry of Love, that's good. I think I must have had the second thing on private or something there a few minutes ago, so that was a bit of a disaster. If you have any questions there, I'll try and deal with them. Michael Shanley, thanks. You like the jumper, good stuff. Good stuff. If you have any questions there, I will be happy enough to try and answer them. Amit Taware, thanks for your advice, always helps. Thanks, Amit, and thanks for showing up. I must apologise. I made a complete balls of this because I obviously had it on private there earlier on, hadn't got it on public, and there was nobody showing up. And the reason nobody was showing up is because it was on private rather than public. But anyway, if you have any questions, I'll try and deal with them. And I don't know what happened there with the previous one. Kevin Dunn, on average, what is the cost of solicitors in buying a house? It'll vary very much, Kevin, but you're probably looking at, for a purchase of a house, you're probably looking at anything for the professional legal fee ranging from 1,250 plus VAT up to probably 1,950 plus VAT. It will depend on the value of the house though, because the value of the house will be important. And the reason for that is if I make a mistake with a house that's worth 50 grand, the subsequent personal or professional indemnity insurance claim is going to be of a certain value, whereas if the house is worth 500 grand, then that claim is going to be far more significant. So there's an element of building in the insurance to the quotation that you might quote. So that's why you might say, like, why would a field, for example, or a small house worth 50 grand, why would that be, much less of a quotation or professional legal fee than a bigger, more expensive house? But the reason is the potential claim down the line. And obviously you do factor in the insurance situation a little bit. Ministry of Love, are we entering bubble territory with the stock market? It depends on which stock market, Ministry of Love. Obviously the United States NASDAQ and so on had a big increase there yesterday and that sort of thing. But I've been in that market now for about 3 or 4 years, and it's shown good steady growth, and there's been ups and there's been downs. But in terms of bubbles, there's always bubbles, I suppose, and there is always increases, significant increases, and there's always contractions. But if you actually do a little bit of study into the market and how it goes over the historically, then you'll find that there has been always a pattern of ups and downs. But by and large, you'll have a gradual increase if you're buying half decent companies. So there may well be a bubble, but I wouldn't be too concerned about it in the current or in the situation, because I'm in for the long haul generally. So Flying Mead Man, I am seconded to a different role within my organization. I signed a specific purpose contract for the term of this role. I'm now approaching the end of this contract. Is my original role contract be valid, or can I insist I sign a new contract for my old role? I did get a line added to the secret. Not sure, Flying Mead Man. I'd want to be seeing your contract, to be honest with you, to be able to advise you properly. Generally, a specific purpose contract is for the specific purpose of carrying out a task or a project or something of that nature. It could be, for example, a road building project. It could be, say, in the Department of Education, to do with perhaps examination, checking and marking of exam papers and so on. But generally, if the specific purpose is fulfilled, well, then you go back to the old role, the old position. So I hope that answers your question. Max Flanagan, how are you? Kevin Dunn, what are the cons to buy to rent system? I'm not really sure what you're asking there. The buy to rent system. I mean, obviously the cons are, the biggest con altogether would be that A, the arse falls out of the property market and the value of your property heads south, and B, you get an absolute toe rag of a tenant, which is possible, that causes you significant problems and so on, and it costs you money. So that is probably the biggest issue. In fact, managing your tenants and getting decent tenants and so on is probably the most critical part to that. PG, hi Terry, hi PG, how are you? Amatuare, planning a new home, but there isn't enough supply where I want it. I'm looking to buy it around 350 grand using Help to Buy scheme. Shall I wait for more months to see supply or price correct? Amatuare, it's up to yourself whether you wait or sit tight and wait, or whether you try and plunge in now. It's entirely up to yourself. That's not a legal question. I'm not in the business, quite frankly, of predicting the market, because I think it's a foolish endeavor. So you need to make the decision based on your own particular circumstances and so on. And supply obviously has dried up, and it's obviously dried up because of COVID-19 and so on. So that's BL, opinion on Bitcoin as an investment. I don't like Bitcoin, BL. I know that's not a fashionable view. I know that all the young people and all the millennials and so on will be pointing and laughing and saying that our fella doesn't know what he's talking about with Bitcoin. Look, you paid your money and you take your choice. I don't fancy Bitcoin myself. If you want to go ahead and invest in it, fire away, but it's not my bag. I like investments that, and I've said it many times, where it's a share in a company that actually makes a product or a service, and I understand and know what they're doing. I have no idea what Bitcoin is doing, Connor Higgins, hi Terry, are you familiar with seller financing as a means of a mortgage and how it works legally in Ireland? Is the seller of the property acts as a mortgage as paid monthly? No, Connor, I'm not familiar with that, and I would run a mile from that sort of proposition, to be honest with you. I mean, if the seller of the property acts as a mortgage and is paid monthly, Jesus, no, I'd steer clear of that, Connor. That's just my thing, and I'd be very concerned about a private individual basically providing a loan or mortgage for to sell his property in circumstances where there's absolutely no difficulty getting money from the banks. So can't understand why you'd do that. It's entirely up to yourself, but it wouldn't be my bag. I like a nice clean deal where there's the start, a beginning or a middle and an end. That's the way I like things, Dara 47, I trade cryptocurrency regularly. Do I pay capital gains tax or income tax? Dara 47, it depends on what you mean by trading it. In other words, are you buying it and you're selling it, or are you buying it and holding it? If you are incurring or gaining or generating gains, well then obviously you are obliged to pay capital gains if you make disposals. You are obliged to pay income tax or dividend withholding tax if there's any dividends, but there isn't any dividends. So the cryptocurrency there, you would be obliged. Obviously, there is gains if you're making gains. And obviously, if you're generating an income, you probably have to declare that as well. So that's entirely between you and the revenue commissioners. But generally, in any society, no matter what endeavour you're engaged in, if you're generating an income or generating gains as a result of disposals, well then clearly you are accountable to the taxman in that regard. PG, I have a couple of questions related to the new right to disconnect from work code of practice. Some companies have training sessions or other activities taking place out of the regular working hours. Yeah, there's no real difficulty with that. How do you see the new code of practice affecting both parties of the contract? That is both employers and employees. Could employees use the new code of practice to not attend these activities? I don't believe so, because I've just gone through the code of practice there myself this morning, and I've actually written a blog post. It's on my website, employmentrightsireland.com. The code of practice mentions the word, or uses the word, routinely, fairly regularly in the code of practice. In other words, employees cannot routinely be asked to respond to emails, cannot routinely be asked to work outside the normal working hours. That doesn't mean that they can't be asked. And so the likes of a training session and so on that you were involved with there, or that you're referring to, there's no difficulty with that. And there's no difficulty with the occasional being asked to work outside normal working hours, or to perhaps to attend for training or whatever. So it's the question of routinely, it's the issue. and the routinely word is the one that's in the code of conduct. It's been used a few times. So, Michael Shanley, can you make a protected disclosure against a former employer? Terry, you probably can. Yeah, you probably can, but you'd want to distinguish between whether it's a protected disclosure or just a big ass grievance, and there is a difference, and it can be hard enough sometimes for employees particularly to distinguish between the two, because for the employee the grievance or the complaint that they have is the beginning and end of the world, whereas it may not cut the mustard from the point of view of being a protected disclosure or a relevant wrongdoing as envisaged or apprehended by the Protected Disclosures Act. So it will depend, but you probably can. Yeah, you probably can. Christopher Darcy, how are you? You have a goal to be able to make enough passive income to feasibly able to quit my day job. Do you think this is a reasonable goal? And if so, where do you recommend starting? Christopher Darcy, I was sold some time ago on the notion of passive income. And quite frankly, there's very little of it around. And that is my experience. And I have a lot of experience in hustling and grinding and online business and digital business and offline business and so on and so forth. And the illusion, the dream of passive income is one where it's more of a dream, to be honest with you, than a reality. And you'll hear and see a lot of people peddling you the myth or the dream of passive income, but passive income involves working your arse off, quite frankly, just to generate the money in a slightly different way, but it's still working your arse off. I think that's just my view, Christopher. Max Flanagan. Hi Terry, doing the same rostering work for the past 4 years, and another employee who has health conditions has been added. This has changed my roster. Whatever reason for grievance. Thanks. Max Flanagan, you would have a reason for grievance, but I'd have a reason for grievance if it started pissing rain now and I intend cutting the grass. In other words, all I have is a grievance or a complaint. Whether I can do anything about it or not is another thing. I probably can't. In fact, I can't. You can make a grievance, all right. So, just if you unpack it, what is a grievance? A grievance is a complaint. So you make a grievance to your employer, and the employer says, look at your contract. And if you're obliged to follow reasonable direction and make yourself flexible and so on, that's it. Grievance over, not upheld, back to business, So, yeah, you can have a grievance, all right, but it's of limited value sometimes. Conal Duggan, hi Terry, for someone's first time on court over €20 cannabis charge, what charges could the person expect to get, and do you think jail time is a possibility? First time for cannabis, €20, no. You'll probably, if you're lucky, get the benefit of the Probation Act. Just make sure your solicitor is a regular attender or a regular a regular solicitor in the court, and it's worth your while getting a solicitor to do the thing for you, to represent you on the day. Don't rock up yourself. Get a solicitor, and you might get, or you probably will get, the benefit of the Probation Act. And if you do, you'll avoid a conviction, especially for a first time and especially for €20. But you're definitely not looking at jail. I can think of far more appropriate candidates, quite frankly, for jail, Now, if you are finding anything useful in this at all, and unfortunately this is the second attempt today, because I made an absolute balls of the first one, because the first video I had it on private, and I'm wondering there why people aren't showing up, and I'm wondering why there's only one person there, and the one person was actually me, and the reason is because I had the freaking thing on private. So I've started again now on a different link, so I'm hoping that if you had the original link bookmarked or whatever, that you'll actually end up here, and you'll get your question answered. Hope you answered your question there, Conal. I don't do much criminal. In fact, I don't do any criminal at all, because crime doesn't pay. But first time €20 cannabis Probation Act, I'd be very hopeful. But Gilson, when trying to get a mortgage, is there an alternative to banks for someone whose wealth has been earned through gambling and investing? Banks don't seem to like these revenue streams. But Gilson, is there an alternative? Well, there might be, but to be honest with you, I'm not familiar with any. I'm not familiar with any, and I deal with mortgages all the time, and I deal with the banks and various lenders and building societies, or what they were called, and so on. I deal with local authorities and that sort of thing. So all of those organizations are obviously concerned with A, lending the money, and that's how they make a few bob, but B, getting the money back. And obviously, if you are going along, rocking up to a bank saying that I'm earning X, Y, and Z through gambling and through all sorts of alternative investments, then, you know, you're going to set off a certain amount of alarm bells. You're going to send off a certain amount of red flags. So, whether there's an alternative or not, there probably is, but you'll probably be paying a fairly exorbitant interest rate, and you know, you'll have to root around. I don't know any, to be honest with you. I hope that answers your question. Vin B. Sunday, question regarding co-plaintiffs. In your opinion, can one plaintiff be removed from an action by any means if only their co-plaintiff has submitted proceedings in real? Don't know what you're asking there. That's a technical question to do with, you know, coming on record and going off record and so on. I mean, a co-plaintiff or a plaintiff is going to have the case dismissed if they fail to prosecute the case, etc. But I mean, if two plaintiffs, I don't know what you're asking there. I mean, generally, you're looking at more a question of co-defendants rather than co-plaintiffs. So I really don't know what you're asking there, I'm afraid. I'm sorry about that. Kevin Dunn, is it legal to own shares in the bonds you have a mortgage in? In the bonds you have a mortgage in. There's no difficulty owning shares in any company. I mean, obviously you might have a mortgage with AIB or Bank of Ireland, but there's no difficulty owning shares in Bank of Ireland or AIB either. And the same applies to many things. So, like, I'd come across situations where I might have shares in a particular company, for example. But the fact that I have shares in the company doesn't mean that I'm not going to represent an employee that might have a dispute with the company, etc. Now, you might say there's a conflict of interest, but if I have shares worth €1,000, for example, in Ryanair, it's not going to create a huge conflict of interest, I don't believe, in the overall context of things, because whether I act or don't act, you know, the value of Ryanair and the capitalization and so on is going to be such that my acting or not acting, it really won't make a huge amount of difference. But just to answer your question there, there's no difficulty, yeah. JP, dividends on the Gero have tax already, tax deduct. Do I have to do anything with revenue? You don't if you are getting the dividends after the dividend withholding tax, as far as I'm aware. So there's dividend withholding tax. The rates are different from different countries, different jurisdictions. It'll vary from Germany to UK to United States. So there is dividend withholding tax. But once you've paid the withholding tax and you get your dividends net, then you should be okay, I think. You'd want to check with an accountant, but that's my understanding anyway. The Brit 2003, can you explain an employer's duty of care and the level of evidence needed to show a breach of duty of care? Thanks. The employer's duty of care. Firstly, an employer has a duty of care to employees. That duty of care is essentially to behave and deal with employees as a reasonable employer would. How a reasonable employer or how any employer would operate or deal with or react to any particular set of circumstances will depend on the circumstances. But basically, it is the question of reasonableness and whether the employer behaves reasonably. So the employee might suffer some sort of a breakdown in work, etc., as a consequence of being bullied and so on, and might sue the employer for negligence and say that the employer failed to disclose or failed to discharge their duty of care. But if the employer has, for example, gone through the various procedures and policies in the workplace, and if the employer has carried out an investigation and perhaps disciplined the offender, then the employer might well have a defence there that they have discharged their duty of care and that they have behaved like a reasonable employer. So really, the question of duty of care and discharging duty of care for an employer is a question of reasonableness. In other words, did the employer behave reasonably? Anyway, if you find this video useful, you might give it all thumbs up there. Thank you. Ray, or have you had any other house buying tips, like when you suggested offering an unusual figure like 250 to make it look like it's your final offer? I have, Ray, yeah. There's a video on my YouTube channel. I suggest that you read it, or watch it rather. It's 10 tips for successful negotiations or something like that. I mean, negotiating is a key skill, and it's an art, and it's a science. But I mean, it's more science than art, quite frankly. And you can develop the skills to become a good negotiator. How? By learning from good negotiators. And good negotiators are people who would have been negotiating all their life fairly successfully and would be negotiating in fairly high stakes circumstances, hostage situations, and so on. So we can learn from those people. We can learn from people who went before us. And I would suggest, Ray, that you will get good value in that video of mine. It's 10 tips for successful negotiations or something like that. But have a look, just do a search there on YouTube for successful negotiations, 10 tips, Terry Gorry or whatever, and you'll come across me. It's not bad. It's actually quite a good video. I shared it the other day on Instagram and it was very, very popular. Got a lot of likes and so on, you know. Colin Casey, is it worth buying a derelict house with acre ground to renovate? Colin, obviously, like, it depends how much you're paying for the bloody place, you know. I mean, it could be a steal of the century, or you could be absolutely getting screwed. So it depends on the price. But like buying a derelict dwelling, the one good thing you have going with the derelict dwelling is that obviously there was some sort of a house or a dwelling there before. So that has you off to the races with an advantage in terms of the getting planning permission. So that's important. So it might be worth your while, but you want to know what you're doing. You want to have a builder lined up. In fact, you want to have a plan, you know. You want to have a plan. ST Usher, Stephen, how are you? What's your opinion on franchising as a business model, both for prospective franchisees and franchisors? Stephen, thanks for coming along, Stephen. Franchising is a great business model if you are getting a good franchise. And a franchise, when I say good franchise, I mean a well-established operating model and, most of all, good brand recognition. So, you know, if you're getting the Burger King or McDonald's, excuse me, then you know what you're buying. You're paying big money, but you're getting a genuine franchise. However, if you're getting a franchise for house cleaning or for cleaning, say, the my yard there, the forecourt outside my house, and maybe cleaning rubbish off the tarmac, you don't really see a franchise in that, because anybody can do it. The barriers to entry to that business, to that industry, is very, very low. Anybody can rock up there with a sweeping brush and a power hose. So depends on the business, depends on the area you're in. Franchising is good. The success rate with franchising is far higher than it is with regular business, but that's because you have a tried and tested model going and on the job. That's what you're buying into, and that's what you're paying the franchise fees for. As to whether it's good for franchisor or franchisee, certainly it's good for franchisor, because a franchisor gets a whole lot of willing individuals who want to start their own business, run their own business, to run and operate this system. And the franchisor is obviously growing market share, building brand value, building recognition, and so on, building a huge intellectual property. I mean, much, for example, or what is the Golden Arches that's over at McDonald's worth? And, you know, they're recognized in everywhere in the world, Tiananmen Square and, you know, Prague and Vienna and so on. So franchising is great, but it depends on your individual situation and so on. There is some things that I wouldn't hope I answered your question there, Stephen. Frank Trapp, hi Terry, do you think the fact that employees were on layoff for over 1 year due to COVID-19, this will impact in any way on the redundancy? I don't really know, Frank, what the position is there. I do know that I think when you're on layoff, I'm not 100%, but I think when you're on layoff, that period may not be counted in terms of your redundancy and calculating the service and so on. But I really don't know the answer to that question, Frank, because you'd want to really unpack the legislation and have a close look at it and see exactly what is the situation. I know you calculated on the previous 12 months or whatever, and obviously if you're laid off for the previous 12 months, it will have an impact on your salary, etc., and on the calculations. So that's sort of a movable feast. In other words, that's a developing situation there, I think. I wouldn't be 100% on that one. James Crowder, 1, 2, 3, 4. Any major differences between Irish and UK law? They're fairly similar systems, to be honest with you, and they all emanate from the same sort of source, and type of thing. You have the same common law sort of jurisdictions in the likes of Australia and Canada as well. So similar systems. There's probably more similarities between UK law and Irish law than differences, quite frankly. Obviously, there will be nuances and so on, but hopefully I answered your question there, James. And if I did answer your question, you might give it the old thumbs up. But Gilson, a follow-up question then, please. Is there a way to get the banks to work with someone if their income comes from the likes of gambling, investing? This individual is essentially self-employed. It's down to the banks, Bajilson. I mean, they're not going to work with you. They're going to lend you the bloody money, and they will be worried about and concerned about getting the money back. And it's not a question of working with you, and it's not really a partnership, quite frankly. So that whole idea of, work with me, they're going to look at it with a cold, hard-headed, cool analysis. And obviously, if the whole gambling situation is causing them concern, and if they're concerned, for example, that in fact it's not gambling, that there is some other source of revenue, they may be concerned about money laundering and so on. So they're concerns that you will have to be taken into account. But as for getting the banks to work with you, I wouldn't be holding my breath, to be honest with you. Kevin Dunn, would you ever enter a notation on behalf or with your customer? Basically, go into the bank with your customer. No, I wouldn't. It's never happened. I mean, I suppose I would if I had to, or if I was requested to, if there was some particular reason to, I presume, or notation there, you may be intending negotiation. Yeah, there's no difficulty with negotiating on behalf of a customer with the bank. Yeah, I've done that all right, but I've never gone into the bank looking for a loan or anything with a customer. Generally, they'll be doing that themselves. But I have negotiated with banks on behalf of and with customers who were in difficulty with debts and so on. Yeah, no problem. Conor Quinn, what is a statutory declaration of a single person that a property is not a shared home or a family home? Why do a bank require it, and does it affect the homeowner's rights? Family homes are protected in Irish law, and it goes back to a historical situation where men generally were ruling the roost in the house, and they could go on the piss, quite frankly, and they could end up dissipating the family home and the value of it and so on, and go and sell it then if they get into debt or get into difficulty with drinking and all sorts of dissipation and dissolute activity. So there's protection in Irish law for individuals, for spouses, basically, and it works both ways. I mean, a woman obviously could go on the batter as well, etc. But the whole protection for family law, the statute declaration is to do with the family law, whether the bank can repossess the home or not. And obviously they will be concerned to know what the family law status of the house is. If, for example, one individual who's the sole registered owner is married, because the other spouse, the other partner, will have a beneficial interest in the property, even though they may not be on title. So that's why the bank wants to know at the outset, when they're lending money, what's the story with the family law situation, and is somebody going to pop up and say, I'm his missus, or I'm his husband or her husband, and you can't repossess the house, or I never knew this mortgage was being entered into, or whatever, Annette Michaela, do you have any opinion on Bitcoin? Annette, thanks for coming along. I don't spend any great time thinking about Bitcoin, except I avoid it myself. That's just my view. As I say a few times there, I've repeated myself, I like to buy shares in companies that make products or provide services. I understand what they're doing. So if it's Ryanair selling airline flights, or if it is McDonald's or Bank of Ireland or AIB or Smurfit's making cardboard boxes, I like that sort of stuff. I understand what they're doing. I know how I can make a few bob. Bitcoin, I don't know what's going on there, quite frankly. That's not to say that I'm completely ignorant of it. It's just to say that I've made a qualitative decision in my mind to avoid it, basically. I'm not investing in Bitcoin. That's just my view. It's too much like gambling. And if I want to gamble, I'm just going to download the Paddy Power app. Frank Trapp, do you think that the new code of practice on right to connect will generate much work for employment law solicitors, for employees who want a policy drawn up, or for employers? I don't, Frank. I don't think it's going to, well, look, it might. The bottom line is, I wrote a blog post there this morning, apparently about this right to disconnect situation. Apparently there's actually some sort of a policy actually contained within the code of practice itself. So you know, I mean, it probably, you could enhance that all right and sell it to people, sell it to clients and so on. But if there's a code of practice set out in the code of, or if there's an actual code of practice set out or policy set out in the code of practice itself, if I was an employer, all I'd be doing is copying and pasting that and working away, because you'd be sound enough, I would have thought. Hope that answers your question, Frank. Trading in cryptocurrencies is high risk, but will the bank see it as gambling for mortgage consideration? Gambling for mortgage consideration. I'm not really sure the Ollie 2404 what view the bank will take on cryptocurrencies. Really don't know. Obviously, they're going to be conservative enough, and they have to. Niall Brennan, they have to be conservative, obviously, in relation to lending money. I mean, they lend money, that's how they make money, but they must get the money back, and that's how they make money, and have to look after shareholders. Shareholders have to be looked after, as well as people borrowing money and young homeowners and millennials and so on. So, Niall Brennan, any general tips for law students? Big fan of your Vision class. Niall Brennan, thanks, Niall. The only general tips I'd have would be just to work hard, I suppose, and have an interest in what you're doing, etc. You probably do if you're doing law already, and that's a key thing. But just work hard, really, and get as much experience, or any experience you can. Make yourself useful if you get a chance with a solicitor or whatever. Mr. Mulhall. Hi Terry, in Irish contract law, is restitution allowed if money was transferred on the basis of a mistake of fact? Going to kick the touch on that one, Mr. Mulhall. Because that's a very specific question, and I'd want to know the exact details and circumstances and so on. Wouldn't really be suitable now for YouTube live stream, I don't think, on a Good Friday. So if you want to send me an email, I'll have a look at it. DC Brit 2003. Are you enjoying a Good Friday? I am, yeah. I'm going to be enjoying it even more now, 1 o'clock, when I go and get my lunch. And then I'm going to cut the grass. It's a nice dry day, it's cold. And I will listen to my audiobook, which at the moment is Daphne du Maurier novel called The General's Wife or something. It's quite good. And Daphne du Maurier, actually, I'm a big fan of hers now. She wrote a book called Rebecca. And then I've read a number of other books of hers called like Jamaica Inn, and there was another one then. And now I'm on this General's Wife. And to be honest with you, they're all very good. I think Daphne du Maurier is an underrated writer. I enjoy it anyway. So that's what I'm going to do. Ala Suresh. I was denied viewing buying for a house by a marketing agent. Ala Suresh. That's unfortunate, but the regulations, as far as I am aware at the moment, the rules are that auctioneers or estate agents, and I was talking to an estate agent about this yesterday, are not permitted, because of the COVID regulations, to allow you to view a house at the moment. Now, I don't know what arrangements they're making. I think they're making arrangements for virtual viewing and all sorts of stuff. But the bottom line is, it may well be that you were denied viewing because of the COVID regulations. And the buying agent, remember, or I presume you're a marketing agent. I presume the marketing agent is the estate agent to which you refer. I mean, they only get paid when the house is sold. So it's in their interest to show it to as many people as they can. But obviously, COVID-19 regulations are regulations, and they must be adhered to, even though there is probably people who are not. Can you file a complaint? Yes, Ala Suresh, you can file a complaint. There's a crowd there in Navan. It's the Property Services Regulatory Authority, PSRA.ie, I think. Get onto them, make the complaint, and all they're going to do is refer you to the COVID regulations and the restrictions on viewing of houses. That's what I think they'll probably do. But go ahead and fire away and file the complaint if you wish. D. If an employee is in a situation where they're facing legal matters ahead which could hinder their performance at their job, is there grounds for dismissal? The two questions of that's a very sort of an opaque question, quite frankly, with all due respect. Now, I don't expect you to give me the full chapter and verse as to what particular legal matters ahead are facing you. But if, for example, the legal matters were, for example, let's just sit for the sake of argument, you're in difficulty with debt, and there's a repossession order on your house or something of that nature, then if your performance dips sufficiently that you're not performing in your job, there is a possibility that you'll lose your job. On the other hand, if the legal matters to which you're referring is some sort of a criminal prosecution, or perhaps for drink driving, or you're going to lose your license, well, that could certainly perform or affect your job, because obviously in certain jobs you're going to need your license and so on. So sometimes things happen which will actually end up costing you your job. So it really depends on the situation, you know, but generally you should be able to keep the two separate, to be honest with you. How can one sorry, I'm just going through these and just after getting yeah, how can one find or create self-build partnership? I'm looking for anyone with land, has planning permit, and is seeking other individuals who want to self-build on his land for a price. Don't know that. Yeah, you may go and make your own inquiries. I don't know how you're going to get people like that. Maybe LinkedIn, maybe Facebook, maybe Twitter. Fintan Donlan, how you Fintan? If I had $2,000 to invest starting on my investing journey, where's the best place to start? $2,000, I suppose it depends, Fintan, how long you can put your money away for, you know. I mean, obviously you could take a punt on growth shares, for example, and you may, $2,000 may be a relatively small amount of money to you, and you may have a decent job coming along, and you might take a risky sort of a view, a high risk view, but a high return view on the situation, and perhaps buy a share or two in a startup or a growth company. On the other hand, if the $2,000 is a lot of money to you, and it'll depend on your circumstances, then you might be better off trying to buy sort of blue chip shares or shares in leading industrials or whatever. So it really depends, and it'll depend on your circumstances. Andrew Balburney, sir, how to get PR in your country, and is it good for foreigners to settle there? PR. Don't know what you're talking about there, Andrew. I'm afraid I'm not sure what your question is. How to get PR in your country, and is it good for foreigners to settle there? Andrew, Ireland is a great place for foreigners to settle. No doubt about that. It's a great country. But I don't know what you're asking there in terms of how to get PR. Sorry, I don't understand that one. Christopher Darcy, follow-up question, if that's okay. What would make rental properties as a worthwhile investment? What would make rental properties a worthwhile investment? Well, obviously, buying a property at the right price, good area, not necessarily a good area from a living perspective, but for a good area from the point of view of letting and so on. Buying the property at the right price, then you need to manage your tenants. And other than that, it's not really rocket science. It's a straightforward sort of an endeavor, very straightforward and simple. Is the risk of poor publicity leverage an employee can use in negotiations? Discrimination case, JL. Yeah, the risk of publicity can be something that you can try to use with some employers. Now, the employer, depends on the employer, quite frankly. Firstly, you need to understand that if it's a WRC thing, then strictly speaking, all claims in the WRC, most cases, not discrimination, but most cases are in private. That means that the risk of publicity shouldn't exist, because you will be warned at the outset by the adjudicator that you can't publicize anything. So having said that, word gets out. Having said that, you could appeal a decision from the WRC, which is in private, end up at the Labour Court, which is in public, and then you're off to the races in terms of potential adverse publicity being a weapon in your armory. So it really depends, and it depends on the situation. Some employers then obviously couldn't give a rat's ass, quite frankly, with bad publicity. Some employers will say, go ahead, knock yourself out, I don't give a shit. Or some employers will be very much aware and very concerned about adverse publicity. Yes, so it could be used, absolutely. But it will depend on the situation. Panda Pad, what is the most important political issue to you personally at the moment? Political issue? Jeez, I don't know, Panda Pad. I mean, I'd like more clarity in relation to the COVID-19 situation, just in terms of the rollout of the vaccine. I'd like clarity there. I'd like sort of firmness of purpose and so on, and just look, get on with the fucking thing. Get the, pardon me, excuse me for cursing, but get the vaccine rolled out. That's probably the biggest political issue. It's the biggest, probably societal issue that we're facing at the moment. So that's where we're at there. Thank you for doing this live stream. Thanks, Christopher. Give it a thumbs up there, lads, if you think it's any use. As a graduate, I am curious about what skills. As a graduate, where the hell is that second question? Yeah, I'm curious about what skills going to give me a better chance of getting a traineeship in the legal sector. It's hard to know. Black Raven 2219. To be honest with you, I only had one. Well, I only applied once and I got it, and I was lucky enough. And that was my old solicitor. If I had to go around hawking myself around at 40 plus years of age to various firms, I'd say I would have struggled to get an apprenticeship, and that's the reality of it. So, I know I was very fortunate. I was very lucky, and hope that you are as well. Nazir Nauman, have you ever considered to offer a course on legal drafting, especially on contract drafting? I guess it would be a great service. Sending love from Pakistan. Good stuff. Thanks, Nazir. I haven't considered that just yet. No, maybe I will consider it, but yeah. Thanks for the live stream. Very kind for us, layman. Good stuff, JL. Thank you. Annette Michaela, can someone start a small business while being employed? Absolutely, no difficulty at all. Yeah, you can, Annette. JL, can covert recordings from team meetings be mentioned in mediation negotiations by employee? They can, yeah. And to be honest with you, the whole question of mediation negotiations, it depends who's conducting the mediation. I mean, if it's WRC mediation, it's supposed to be in private, but it is subject to or without prejudice. So anything goes in the mediation, but if the mediation is unsuccessful, then all bets are off, and anything that was discussed in the mediation cannot be later used. So, but in terms of using it at the mediation, there should be no difficulty at all, Andrew Lyons, I'm 17 and my house is getting repossessed off my mom.